Kenneth DeFays, the emeritus professor of geosciences at Princeton, told me one time that we have in the United States approximately 200 years of coal left in this country. I said, well, that's a long time. That gives us a little bit of breathing room. We've got some time to develop some alternative energies, some renewable sources, some magic box, some perpetual motion machine that we can come up with. And he said, no, but see, if you just add a 2% increase in demand per year, and that's below what the demand is actually expected to be, if you add that, we actually only have 50 years of coal left in the United States. So if we continue to use coal after 50 years, if we haven't come up with something else, then we're going to have to buy it from someplace else. Guess who has all that coal? China and Iran. Really? We trade one for another? So what I want you to do is think that this is not, we're not talking green. We're talking common sense. We're talking about concern and care for our environment. That doesn't make you an environmentalist. If that gives you chills and you don't want to be called an environmentalist, you're a tree hugger and you're some kind of socialist, then don't worry about that. If you care for the environment, what you're caring for is our home. Anybody who believes humans are not part of the environment and dependent upon it are absolutely deluded. Humans aren't separate. We're not over here and the environment is over here. We're like this. And we need that environment to survive. And in order to be sustainable, we've got to figure out not only renewable resources, but we've got to figure out how to conserve the energy that we do have and the resources that we do have. Has it ever occurred to you that finding oil or coal, discovering that, is an incredibly expensive process that takes a long time, and a lot of petrogeologists doing a lot of work to discover all these things. But if you saved 250 kilowatts of electricity in your house over a week, 250 kilowatts of electricity, that's like finding 250 kilowatts of electricity. That's like finding 3 tons of coal. That's like keeping 3 tons of coal in the ground for the time when it may necessarily be needed if we haven't reached the point of coming up with alternative sources. The idea of energy conservation and building a home that's green is not a principle that has much to do with being an environmentalist. It has to do with being a human being. It has to do with being an intelligent life form that knows that it cannot sustain life as we know it. Or we can continue on the path we're on and burn all the coal that we have remaining and increase the parts per million to 500 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we can turn the Great Plains, Texas is going right now through the worst drought it's been through in 150 years. And although no one can say any single event can be pointed directly to climate change and global warming, there are enough models that have been done, thousands and thousands of models have been done, that said this is exactly what's going to happen. We can't say this is why it happened, but we told you this kind of stuff was going to happen. What we know of our life is going to change dramatically unless we in this room change. And unless we can get the legislatures around the country, starting with the Minnesota legislature, to believe that the experiment that we're about today in encouraging people to build more energy efficient homes, to conserve energy so that we can sustain that for a longer period of time, buying us capital room in order to develop new forms of energy. The Department of Defense and the CIA issued a thing called the Hirsch Report 4 years ago, which I did a story on WCCO TV. They said we should have started this project 40 years ago. we're 40 years behind. We could hit a wall. We could simply hit a wall unless we grow up and start doing things in a wise fashion. That's what I would call GreenStar, wisdom. It's not a fanciful thing. It's not an idea that says whose time has come and will pass very soon. On the contrary, the way that GreenStar is asking homes to be built today, according to an incredible series of checklist marks that you have to hit, and I know because the architects that are working on my house, who are in this room tonight, who went to school to figure it out, came back bleary-eyed at all they had to learn. All they had to, and these were green builders. These people knew how to build green until they saw what was required of them. From people who are blessed with a lot is required of them. And those in this room are blessed with foresight and thought and courage. And sometimes it feels like you are out there alone on an island, because a lot of people are not coming and beating down your door saying, I want to build a greenhouse. Because a greenhouse costs a little bit more to build. And Americans hate nothing more than first costs. First cost is the worst thing in the world to most people in America, unless it comes to an investment. Nobody worries when they say, I'll say a little bit of Google or IBM or Apple for $50,000. You don't think, boom, put that money down. Because you're knowing what's coming down the road. That money is coming back to you. Well, not only is money coming back to you when you're building green, when you're following Minnesota GreenStar requirements, not only are you protecting nature and the environment and creating the possibility and the hope of a sustainable future that affects not just you least, but affects your children and your grandchildren. I've always wondered what these politicians, Jim Inhofe is an example, Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma. I feel so sorry for this man who believes that all of these efforts that we're trying to get behind are silly and a hoax. And he passes legislation, because he's in power right now, that tries to thwart any effort that is aimed toward energy conservation. He tries to thwart that. But I understand why. Because it's a representative form of government, and he happens to represent a part of Oklahoma that relies on oil, the drilling of oil wells, the employment of wildcatters, the employment of field hands, the employment of the supply line that's providing field equipment. He represents those people, and so he would actually be, as a representative in the wrong. He would be morally wrong to stand up and say, to hell with all of the people I represent. Let's throw everything out the window and trash fossil fuels right now. He would be wrong. And I feel so sorry for him, because he is wrong, and his grandchildren will come to him one day and say, Grandpa, what did you do? Did you have the courage of your conscience to do what was right? Or not? Did you care about money and your re-election, or about the future? Did you care about me? Did you care about the children I'm going to have? And that's the only answer he can give. No, I wasn't thinking about you at all. And that's what makes me sad, even though I write terrible things about him, and continue to write terrible things about him. And would have to be restrained if I ever walked in the halls of Congress and punching him in the nose. I still feel sorry for him. So I hope what you're seeing is that the idea of GreenStar is really an idea toward a sustainable future for everyone. For those of you who like to think on the wallet side, and I would imagine half of you in the room are thinking on the wallet side, I divide basically a population up into two groups. One side is the ethical, moral side. That doesn't mean they're less or more moral than the people who are the wallet side. But if you took somebody and said, look, you make a household income of $40,000 a year. I can put a solar array on your roof for $30,000. Well, that's absurd. That's absurd. Unless you were compelled to do that by some knowledge or some belief that you needed to be part of the solution. And so you'd figure that out. You'd take out a loan. You'd send your kids to state colleges. You would not go to Disney World every other year. You would save that money, and you would find a way to put that solar array on your roof for $30,000. Which, by the way, would cost you about $3,500 today, with all of the incentives that are available from the utility companies, from the state, and from the federal government. Currently, Peter Vujovich put $65,000 on his roof, on his barn, and the breakdown of his figures was his out-of-pocket expenses was $4,500. So you can do it. But this is the moral side who would do that because they believe in the importance of conserving, of creating the best possible environment and doing the least possible harm to that environment to sustain it. On the other side are the people who will ask this first question, and you run into them a million times in doing your business. What's the payback? How quick is the payback on that? If the payback is reasonable to them, then they might consider putting up solar power. They have nothing morally against it. They're not frightened of solar power. But if you can tell them that it's going to make you money. One of the things I'd like to do, and I can do now because I'm a private citizen, but I'd like to get with the state of Minnesota, who have a rule that your primary residence can get a benefit, a tax credit, and XL will provide you an actual payment, a cash payment, if you put solar power on your main house. I think that's wrong-headed. I think it ought to be on your lake cabin. Shouldn't it? Well, let me look at it. That doesn't make sense to you. I'm going to explain to you. You're using all that power in your residence all the time. But if it was on your lake cabin, you're only going to use it 3 months out of the year. That means 9 months out of the year it's producing electricity and running your meter backwards. And XL, the co-ops and the munis, Great River Energy, have to pay you for that electricity you're putting back in the grid. You become your own utility. Well, why wouldn't you put it on your lake cabin? Put it on your lake cabin. So we're going to have solar on our place. They don't have it on the lake cabin yet. I might try to figure out how to get that done. After I get this law changed, I'll do that.